Hello everyone and welcome back. While emotions are very personal and varied, they can create a very strong connection to a historical theme or an exhibition storyline. Conversations, on the other hand, can create a very inclusive understanding and engagement with history, combining the two, and you have a really strong cocktail for your interpretation strategy. So I thought it was time to dive into these two, sometimes difficult, but also quite strong emotional aspects of interpretation, which is designing for emotions or if you like, designing for conversation, and what actually happens when we combine the two and we create something that is really interactive engagement, but also something that is emotionally very easy to connect to. As always, if you like the content of these videos, remember to like them, subscribe to the channel, and please also add your own perspective on this. And if you have any examples to share, please do. These two very different design perspectives can really be interesting to dive into. And if we look at them separately first, an emotional involvement can create a very personal connection to the past. But you also have to be prepared to embrace diverse emotional reactions. It can be very different how individuals and people with different cultural backgrounds react to specific themes or storylines in, for example, an exhibition space. And it can lead to very varied emotional responses to the same kind of exhibit or artifact. And this makes it very unpredictable. Especially if we try to predict the emotional reactions we might get, and also in terms of what kind of risk of unintentional alienation or misunderstanding that may occur. And ultimately, this is not something we can always control. There are ethical considerations that we can potentially address beforehand when designing for an exhibition, especially ethical issues in manipulating emotions or dealing with very sensitive historical content. And most of the time, museum professionals are already very aware of these. But it's also worth reminding ourselves that an emotional reaction is something that can an extreme emotional reaction is something that can be sparked even when we think we are on very neutral ground. And that's not always something we are in control of, or indeed something we should be in control of. Sometimes we also have to take responsibility for our own personal emotions. And when we design for emotions, we never really know what kind of reaction we end up having from our audiences. And I'll dive into a few examples later on, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about designing for conversations as well, because conversations can spark a direct involvement and interaction when we encourage dialogue, especially. Designing for conversation encourages visitors to engage with the content actively and share and shape their own perspectives. A really powerful tool when designing for conversation is presenting multiple perspectives. And now I talk in another video about parallel storytelling, which is such a powerful and really interesting tool to use. And presenting multiple viewpoints to foster a more comprehensive understanding of history is really something that can take you in many different directions in your interpretation. Then there is the aspect of social learning, where conversation can enhance learning through social interaction and collective reflection. And sometimes that's a lot more powerful and long-lasting than when we learn in a more sort of formal educational context. So social learning, especially sparked through conversations, can be an incredibly powerful tool as well. Now, when we try to combine these two, so designing for emotional conversations, we have some really interesting options here. We see a lot of this going on in, for example, interactive exhibitions, where we see the use of interactive elements that prompt visitors to discuss their thoughts or interpretations, such as question prompts or discussion zones and so on. And these can be very, very active, and both in terms of learning, but also in terms of social understanding. We also have facilitated dialogues, so a trained facilitator or guide who leads a group discussion, for example, or encourage visitors to share their perspective. That can be very powerful as well, especially on tours. We have community involvement, I think something most museums do anyway, where the benefit of involving community members in the design process can ensure that diverse voices are represented and heard, but it can also address some of those ethical perspectives that we talked about before in terms of emotional engagement, that, you have potentially addressed questions that may be a little emotional sensitive already from the beginning by involving community members or groups directly. Digital engagement is an interesting one as well, and one we always, I think, struggle a little bit with. Everything from social media to apps and so on, where you can extend your conversation beyond the physical museum space. And this is something I think we all want to do. And a digital tool of any sort is usually a very good way of doing that. There are also some fantastic emotional triggers you can use as conversation starters, because very often when we get engaged in a conversation, we do so because we are emotionally engaged, because some form of emotion has been triggered, or we might have a personal involvement in something. And these emotional elements can play a very important role by serving as catalysts for conversations rather than the end goal. So you're not really designing here to create a specific goal or bottom line, if you want. The goal is to be a catalyst for conversation, not really to lead visitors in any specific or certain direction. And that's very important to remember as well in your design. Integrative design is always really interesting as well, where we have emotional triggers with conversation opportunities, and they can create a balanced and very enriched visitor experience, again, because you combine these two elements. Now, I want to show you a couple of photo examples here, a couple that I took myself. If you look at the top left photo and the bottom right photo, those are both from the same museum, the National Maritime Museum in London. And you have two emotional questions here. Both of them triggers an emotion, or created to trigger an emotion, designed to trigger emotion, but with a specific question. So I feel most lost when, and lost is a feeling that's very personal and very varied. We don't feel lost about the same things, but your reaction will be different and your response will be different, but we all know that feeling of being lost. Another thing is memory of a specific thing or element that we all have some sort of connection with. In this case, the sea, your memory of the sea. Again, a very, very personal, emotional question, but one that can spark a lot of different replies and very varied replies. And also some quite emotional ones, as well as some very rational and fun and engaging ones. So you will get a lot of replies coming from all sorts of emotional reactions with these two questions. Now, the bottom left picture is from the University Museum of Tartu in Estonia, where you have a little interaction there where you can learn to write in binary code. And this is, in a way, a very playful little interactive, where you can also get a discussion and create a little bit of a competition. So you have a social learning element here as well, whilst at the same time learning something new. Now, I brought the top right photo in as well, because I found that to be a little tricky. This is from the National Museum of Estonia, also in Tartu, where you have a kind of traditional historical exhibition there with lots of artifacts around. And then you have these benches with iPads lying around from time to time, and you can sit down and interact and engage with the content in a more detailed way. There is also the possibility of answering a question and engaging digitally with the objects around you, whilst at the same time looking at them, the real objects. And this is an interesting little digital way of engaging people. Now, the risk here is that the emotional context is getting a little lost, because you actually have to look for the questions and the interactions, and where you can leave your own personal perspectives behind. And that's not always something visitors are willing to do. If you want to create an emotional trigger, it kind of has to be visible and direct and right there in front of you. If you have to do something and look for it, visitors are less likely to engage. But a lot of museums use these, where you have to press a screen or something in order to start an interaction. And that's usually the case with digital engagement tools. And it can actually create a little bit of a barrier there. Whereas if you look at the top left one, it's very easy to see right away what you need to do. And you can even look at other visitors' responses. And although this is a completely, non-digital little interactive, it can be very, very powerful, because even when you add your own handwriting to something, or add little drawing, perhaps, as you can see some visitors have done there, it becomes even more personal. Whereas when you write on a screen, there is already a specific font you're writing in, or a specific format in which you're writing, and it kind of takes the personal out of it a little bit. And that can be tricky if you want to create an emotional engagement. So be careful how you use digital emotional engagement tools, especially if you want to design for both emotions and for conversations. Most of the time we know what to do with digital tools, so they can be easy because they don't require any introduction. We all know most of us know how to use an iPad, for example, but they can take the personal or the emotional aspect away. So just something to be aware of there, but lots of really interesting ways of doing this. And I would so like to hear how you have gone about this little challenge. So please share your own examples. Have you found any really good emotional conversation starters? It can also be examples where perhaps these two different forms of designing were separated. One that was very specifically emotional, and one specifically designed for conversation. And what did you find? What worked? What didn't really work? And why was that? Please add your own thoughts and perspectives on this.